Hi, Mark. It's great to see you today. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure it's a late hour over there in San Francisco. We very much look forward to hearing your insightful views about BlackRock's perspectives on ESG. Now, before we do that, just a few words about your exceptional credential. Mark is currently CCO, that is Chief Client Officer and Senior Managing Director of BlackRock, the world's largest investor and shareholder, with some $9 trillion assets under management. Mark has held various senior positions, including Chairman of BlackRock's Asia Pacific region, and is also currently a member of BlackRock's Global Executive Committee, among other prominent posts. Now, floor is yours.
Well, Dr. Jun, it's great to see you. I wish it was in person, and please, I'd like to extend my thanks for inviting me to this conference and all of the organizers of the IGE Shinhan Financial Group International Conference 2021. Now, as you mentioned, I'm sitting here in San Francisco, but my heart very much sits in Asia. And I was fortunate to spend my formative years and more recently in the Asia Pacific region and had many happy memories of trips to Seoul and South Korea and seeing some incredible friends and colleagues and clients there. And we're very proud of our business and footprint in South Korea. And so again, a double thank you for inviting me along today. So in my brief remarks, I really wanted to touch on 4 issues. First, talk a little bit about the transition to net zero and how we're seeing that. Secondly, I'll share some thoughts on sustainable investing trends. And next, I'll talk a little bit about investment stewardship and the stewardship of capital and the responsibility we have there. And finally, I thought it might be useful to give you a little bit our views on some of the trends and opportunities that we see in the Asia Pacific region. So let me start with the transition to a net zero economy. Now, as you all know, in 2015, a global consensus emerged in Paris around limiting global warming, ideally to 1.5 degrees, and then more recently around achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Well, since that milestone, we've seen the physical effects of climate change, as I mentioned, here in the West, where we're seeing wildfires, as well as in Australia, flooding across Asia and around the world more broadly. These physical effects, which will only continue to mount, are playing out also in financial terms as they increasingly impact insurance rates and financing decisions. Now, as an asset manager and fiduciary to our clients, BlackRock is at the nexus between the owners of capital and the companies and assets we invest in on their behalf. That's why our CEO wrote that climate risk, in our opinion, is an investment risk, and that it would have a profound impact on businesses around the world and ultimately how investors would evaluate those businesses. And so BlackRock and other investors would increasingly be asking questions around greater transparency into the ways climate risk would affect a company's business and also their ability to grow over the long term. Now, not all industries and companies are moving as fast as we'd like, but we do believe that disclosures are improving dramatically. And we're beginning to see a real transformation in the corporate world as more and more companies commit to net zero. Now, there's been tremendous progress in the public markets recently. Sustainable investing strategies globally saw nearly 400 billion of inflows in 2020 and are on track to grow by almost twice as much this year. We believe this is the beginning of the most profound transformation of the financial system over the past decades. Now, as we move forward with this energy transition, we need to make sure that we're pushing just as hard on the demand side as we are on the supply side. Otherwise, we risk a supply crisis that drives up costs for consumers, especially those who are the least able to afford it, and risk making the transition politically untenable. Now, a successful transition will require a careful balance between supply and demand. And at the same time, we need to mobilize the public and private capital to bring down that green premium that I've talked about. So let me turn now to the sustainable investing trends that we're seeing. Ironically, we've seen COVID actually accelerate the global demand for sustainable investing products across the industry. And this may well be coming from the fact that at the moment there is political will to talk about and address the issues of climate change. But I think everyone recognizes that this is a very, very tall mountain that we have to climb. So we're seeing definitely a change in the way in which partnership models are working. This comes in the form of both partnerships with governments, asset owners, asset managers, and banks. And technology is playing such a critical role in helping people understand how to both measure the risk they have from climate change, but also to mitigate it. We are absolutely not believers that divestment is responsible investment. We believe that those companies who today emit greenhouse gases are actually part of the solution towards a net zero economy, and that we need to work together with them as they develop their long-term strategies towards a net zero based business model. I'd like to just mention that, in certain regions like APAC, where we have a lot more of the emerging markets present, we're seeing a very different approach from Europe and the United States. Interestingly, in the United States, there's still very divided public opinion and political opinion on the role that climate change will play in the economies going forward. And so that is a very different position from Europe, where obviously we feel that they've been very much at the forefront of driving initiatives towards climate change. In Asia, many more considerations around employment and bringing society out of poverty is intricately linked with climate change. And so we believe that that brings a unique set of dynamics and challenges to the broader Asia-Pacific region as those economies move towards a net zero basis. Now, let me turn for a moment to our role as a steward of capital. This is often where BlackRock comes under scrutiny from the media and other commentators. Because as the world's largest money manager, we actually are voting and engaging with different companies and sectors on how they develop their long-term strategy towards net zero. But we have a very profound belief that actually better quality reporting and data supports an investor's understanding of the drivers of risk and value in companies' business models. The increasing demand from investors for more complete and comparable sustainability reporting, and from companies for clarity on what to report, led BlackRock to ask in January 2020 that companies publish reports aligned with the recommendations of the TCFD, supplemented by industry-specific metrics such as those identified by the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. Now, I'm pleased to be able to report at this conference that South Korea actually topped the list, with 16 public companies publishing SASB-aligned disclosures, 14 of them for the first time. And this underscores the fact that Asia can be leading the way when it comes to developing a framework for ESG reporting. And it leads me to my final observation, which is what are the opportunities that we see in the Asia-Pacific region? Currently, Asia has approximately 24% of its private capital managed in ESG committed assets. This is lower than the European region and North America, but that obviously gives a lot of runway for growth over the coming years. Now, what are some of the areas that Asia can lead the way in terms of the sustainability space? Well, first of all, decarbonization. With a shifting energy mix towards cleaner and more efficient energy sources, we believe that Asia can lead the way. And indeed, recently, we signed a partnership with Temasek to launch something called the Decarbonization Partners. And this partnership will launch a series of late-stage venture capital and early growth private equity investment funds that will focus on advancing decarbonization solutions to accelerate global efforts towards that net zero by 2050. We also believe in electrification, and again, we believe Asia can lead the way. Indeed, Korea is a real leader in the electrical vehicle space. South Korea reported the higher number of charging locations per 100 kilometers of roadway, followed by the Netherlands, interestingly enough. The green infrastructure funding gap. there's a growing need to address this green infra funding gap, and the Asian Development Bank has actually been taking a lead in that, recognizing that there may be a need for up to 1.7 trillion to be invested annually. And so just last week, to underscore this, we actually announced an investment of 100 million into a leading Korean solar company, and this company will use the capital to acquire and build small-scale solar assets in South Korea to deliver more than 350 megawatts in power generation. So as I conclude my remarks today, I would just like to turn a little bit to the future and the opportunity. It is easy sometimes to view this mountain as a difficult one to summit, but certainly from the seat I'm sitting in, we're seeing more conviction and more action from more multinational companies than at any point in time over the prior decades. While there are many challenges on this journey to net zero, we believe, based on our research, that this transition could drive as much as 25% higher cumulative GDP growth over the next 2 decades alone. That represents an investment opportunity of some $50 trillion. But we need a globally consistent approach that spans both public and private sectors. We need to build trust in the broader economies that everyone is doing their part, and each side needs to work together in defining sector-specific pathways to net zero. With that, Dr. Jin, I'd love to pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you very much for your very enlightening speech. Perhaps one quick question that I may have for you is that in the beginning you also said that your heart is with Asia Pacific. Now, having said that, I think we have to recognize that the important country that has to make a big move forward along this line is perhaps China. Do you have any close dialogue with the authorities and also the corporations that you made investment in China to facilitate the move towards this global target?
It's a great question, Dr. Jin, and I used the word trust during my presentation because I think part of the historical issues with climate emissions and reducing climate emissions was that there was a lack of trust globally on who was emitting and who was taking steps to reduce the carbon footprint. And I think that situation remains. But the difference is that I think as China has emerged to being a global powerhouse economically, is that they themselves realize that the future sustainable growth of their own economy, as well as the ability to attract capital, which of course has always been a major issue for all of the Asia Pacific region, has become even more closely linked with progress on climate, on greenhouse reductions. So our belief, and again, these are broad statements for a very large and complex economy that is highly reliant on coal, but our belief is that they are taking very large strides forward to address the issues of climate for the long term. And like many other countries, that is a journey that requires alignment, as I mentioned, between government, private sector, private capital, as well as the public markets. And whilst I think this is not an easy task to achieve, they're definitely taking better strides now, whether it comes to things like solar power and wind power, electrification and so forth. These are all areas where they're spending a lot of time. So I'm confident that, China, just as it has had to modernize its economy very quickly, I think will use that opportunity to find ways for, cleaner energies and to actually reduce emissions.
Okay, thank you very much for your time and insight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
네.